Work from home arrangements for public service workers will end under a coalition government.
I'm not going to tolerate a position where taxpayers are working harder than ever to pay their own bills and they're seeing public servants in Canberra refuse to go to work.
But we don't have to adopt all of America's policies.
Nobody's going to work from home. They're going to be going out, they're going to play tennis, they're going to play golf, they're going to do a lot of things. They're not working.
Is working from home a luxury legacy of the pandemic that Australia can no longer afford? Or is it simply too late to try and reverse a trend that's helped improve the work-life balance for millions of people? Well, the battle lines are being drawn. Hello, I'm Rebecca Jones. Welcome to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. This week on the show, working from home. It's been a popular topic of conversation for the last few years, ever since many of us were forced to open our laptops on the kitchen table during the pandemic. Recently, we've seen a rise in opposition to remote working from some of the world's most powerful politicians and bosses and, even President Trump himself. Furthermore, it looks like working from home is shaping up to be an issue in Australia's upcoming election. To find out why, I'm delighted to welcome Peter Vercoe, a 28-year veteran of the Bloomberg newsroom, to the podcast. Pete covers global business for us, but over the years he's worn a great many hats, including Australia Bureau Chief, manager of our global front page, and team leader of Asian economic coverage. Pete, you've been a journo for 3 decades here, at least. Did you think when you started in the newsroom that we would be talking about whether or not jobs could be done from home so much?
Well, no. When I started, it wasn't really even possible to work from home. We didn't have the technology. We sort of didn't have fast internet, anything like that would allow us to work from home. And I even recall when we first went into lockdowns in Australia, and that was about 5 years ago to the day.
It is.
Thinking, in a couple of years, we'll all be back at the office. Landlords will want us back in. Our bosses will want us back in the office. Yet here we are 5 years on, and we're still debating whether we should have to come back to the office full time or be allowed to work from home in some form.
I know, right? I mean, I can't believe some bank employees are getting fired for using those mouse jiggler contraptions that make it look like you're working when you're not really working. I mean, maybe that says more about me. I don't know. What people want to know, Pete, is what exactly Peter Dutton has been saying about working from home. He's come out quite strongly against it, hasn't he? What has he actually said? And is he being tone deaf, or is this some sort of genius strategy to win votes?
Yeah, well, Dutton was very clear. We're going to an election in May, and he has come out and said that if he wins power at that election, he wants to force all government workers to return to the office 5 days a week. He did give a little bit of flexibility for arrangements that have already been made, but there wasn't a lot. It is a blanket return to office mandate. His finance spokesperson, Jane Hume, said that the public service workforce has shown a lack of respect for the work that went into earning the taxes that they spend, and the work from home had become a right that was creating inefficiency. I don't know. It's hard to see this being a vote-winning strategy where work from home has become a very embedded and popular working arrangement, particularly for women and for parents.
And what's the reaction been from Labor? I'm betting this may not be seen as a vote winner that they're desperate to match.
No, well, Labor have really latched onto this as an opportunity to paint Dutton as Trump light. They've been very keen to do that, particularly to scare off moderate conservative voters by sort of linking, if this is one idea that he's imported from Trump, how many others does he want to import? The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, just said that it's lazy policy importing these ideas from the US. I think there's a much stronger strand here as well, where Labor have also attacked this proposal as anti-women. The Public Service Minister, Katie Gallagher, said that working from home arrangements have helped families juggle home and work responsibilities. And we've really seen that not just through the pandemic, but later. We know that women still bear the brunt of most child rearing and raising responsibilities. Everything from early childcare through to doing the school run, to ballet classes, to soccer training, drop-offs. And working from home has allowed women the flexibility to do that without having to pull back from their work responsibilities and their main job, by giving them the flexibility of maybe clocking off for an hour in the afternoon to do that, and then clocking back on for an hour after dinner to catch up on the rest of their work.
I think it's also interesting to point out as well that we received the latest gender pay gap data around the same time as a lot of these comments were coming out from the opposition that showed nearly 3/4 of all employers in Australia have a gender pay gap that favours men, with women earning some $28,000 less than their male counterparts.
We know that one of the main reasons behind that gap is the career breaks that women have to take to have and raise children, that takes them out of the workforce. When they come back in, if they're working in a part-time role, it's harder for them to advance their career into those senior and well-paid roles that will help them reduce that gap. Working from home, or the ability to work from home, having a flexible work arrangement, can be a key part of allowing women to come back into the workforce in those roles.
Of course, and that extends to people that have other forms of caregiving responsibilities too, right? Like taking care of elderly parents, or there's any number of ways that we can take advantage of this kind of flexibility. I think you raise a really important point here, Pete, that it is really impossible to examine this work from home issue through just one lens. I guess it is more simplistic to try and group things into one camp or another, but the reality, right, is just so much more nuanced. I want to step a little bit outside the Canberra bubble and look a little more deeply into the state of work from home from a geographical sense across Australia. I was reading recently some data from the Property Council of Australia that showed Melbourne has the highest office vacancy rates in the country, with almost a fifth empty. Here's what the Melbourne Lord Mayor had to say about that recently to Sky News.
I'm a very strong supporter of people turning up to their workstation to do their work, and certainly at the City of Melbourne we take a leadership role in these things. We lean in. We believe that, if you're working at one of our swimming pools or at a local library, in the parks and gardens, a maternal health centre,
correct,
then you have to turn up at work to do your job. And if you're a bureaucrat working at Town Hall, then you should be turning up as well, because we're all one team Melbourne at the city.
Pete, is the work from home trend still as strong as ever in Australia because we've managed to uncouple it from the necessity of the pandemic and seize the good things that we've already talked about that come from this kind of flexibility? I am speaking obviously as a Melbourneian who, like many of my neighbours, was forced to stay in a 5-kilometre radius of my home for many a day during the pandemic. It's not the case anymore, though.
I think the pandemic showed us what was possible with work from home. It was a real-time, large-scale experiment, and for most businesses, and I think of us, it went very smoothly, and it showed that yes, you can work from home and continue to do your job and do it well.
I think the idea of doing a radio hit for Bloomberg while I had toilet training twins before the pandemic was something that were just incite terror in my heart, but it was possible, right? It was a great experiment. Glad it's over, though.
Yeah, and maybe one of the reasons too that Melbourne is still struggling to get back to the office is that you guys endured some of the world's longest lockdowns, and just became a bit more used to it and a bit more used to the benefits and the advantages of working from home.
Could well be. We do know, though, that employers in Australia are starting to clamp down on work from home across the board. What are the most recent examples, or the more prominent ones that we have of this, Pete?
Yeah, so big corporates, some of Australia's biggest companies are leading the push to get workers back to the office. One of those is the Commonwealth Bank, Australia's biggest bank. It's required its workers to spend at least half their working days each month in the office since July 2023, so coming up for 2 years. But for a long time, companies, when they introduced these return to office mandates, did it almost on an honour system, that they just hoped that their workers would come back. There wasn't any monitoring of it or anything like that. But as time went on, they started to crack down on this. And there was an interesting story that I read recently about the Commonwealth Bank cracking down on what's called coffee badging, where a worker would come in, badge into the office, hang around just long enough to have a coffee, chat to a couple of colleagues, make sure that their presence had been noted in the office by a manager, and then clock out and go home and finish their working day from home. So what we're seeing, what the Commonwealth Bank has done now, it's told workers that they need to spend at least 4 hours a day in the office to meet their attendance requirements. We've also seen ANZ Bank, has told staff their bonuses may be cut if they fail to meet office attendance requirements. That's also a policy that's been rolled out at Insurance Suncorp and Origin Energy.
What does that say, though, about people's desire to work from home if they're spending that not insignificant amount of money to commute into the Sydney CBD, badge in, make a coffee and badge out? What about parking? That's not cheap either, is it?
No. Well, I think what it shows is that people still really value the ability to work from home and will, cut some corners or bend the rules a little bit to make sure that they, still have the possibility to do that. Communication consultancy Sec Newgate's latest Mood of the Nation report found around 40% of workers are still working at least one day a week at home, and most expect hybrid work to continue this year. They see a little bit of drift back to the office, and then there's been figures from the Bureau of Statistics as well that found as of August last year, 36% of workers usually worked from home at least sometime during the week. The long-term average before the pandemic was between 20 and 30%. Probably a little bit higher than you'd expect, but in the pandemic, it jumped up to 40% when we were forced to work from home. So I think the fact that it's only gone from 40% in the pandemic to around 30%, 36% now, 5 years on, shows that work from home is very popular with Australian workers.
And when we come back, amongst everything else that's going on in the White House, why has Donald Trump made the return to office one of his big priorities? And welcome back to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. You're here with me, Rebecca Jones, and Global Business Editor Peter Vercoe. So, Pete, we're seeing a slowish but meaningful ramp up in opposition to working from home in Australia. This largely reflects trends that have been playing out in the US. Tell us what Donald Trump's thoughts are on work from home at the moment and what he's done since his own return to office.
Well, I think it would be fair to say that Trump is not a fan of work from home. In fact, one of the first executive orders he signed on his first day back in office was to order all government departments and agencies, and I quote from it, to take all necessary steps to end work from home arrangements and require employees to return to in-person work on a full-time basis.
Well, that's that.
That's that. He wants every government worker back in the office. I think it's also interesting that Elon Musk, who we have seen emerge as not only Trump's biggest political donor, but as one of his closest advisors and probably somebody with the president's ear, has also been a very vocal figure in ordering staff back to the office. He was one of the first to do it in June 22 at Tesla, when he told workers that they had to spend at least 40 hours a week in the office, at least 40 hours a week, and anyone who didn't comply would be assumed to have resigned. So we are really seeing, some of the most powerful voices in US politics and business trying to finally end the work from home arrangements from the pandemic.
Crikey, at least 40 hours? What is the average week? I don't want to know the answer to that. That's Tesla. What else is happening in the private sector? What have we heard from the big US banks recently on the work from home issue?
Yeah, well, the Wall Street banks have really been at the vanguard of ending work from home and getting people back to the office. And probably the loudest proponent on Wall Street of that is JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon, who I think would be fair to say is probably the most powerful banker in America, hence probably the most powerful banker in the world. He has railed against work from home, has fully supported return to office mandates, and all JP Morgan workers will be expected back in the office 5 days a week from later this month. He's been very colourful in his opposition to work from home. He says it doesn't work for those who want to hustle. It doesn't work for spontaneous idea generation, and it doesn't work for culture. And there was a very fun story from last month where he was taped at an internal town hall meeting where he used some rather salty language that we probably can't repeat on the podcast, where he really went to town against work from home. He railed against employees not paying attention on the Zoom. He told his workers, "Don't give me this, that work from home Friday works." And he said that there's not a goddamn person you can get hold of on a Friday when he tries to call them. So, yeah, he's made no secret of he would like people back in the office.
No bones about it, is there? Pete, what is the bigger picture here? Why do governments, why does the Australian government care if employees are working in the office or not?
Well, the reasons mostly cited are to reduce waste and fraud and improve productivity and efficiency. I think what it really comes down to is that managers want to have direct oversight of their employees, and they feel the best way they can do this is to have them in the office where they can see what they're doing, making sure that they're not sitting there in their pajamas on a Zoom call. It's a bit of a trope that the bureaucracy has had to contend with. There's not a lot of evidence to back that up. And it's even an argument that the Liberal Party in Australia has used to justify its push to get all government workers back to the office. The Liberal Party's Jane Hume, in a speech recently, claimed that one federal employee was allowed to work from home full-time, but in reality was frequently uncontactable because they were travelling across the country in a caravan with their family. It's probably a bit of a stretch to take one example and tar every government worker with that, but that is the reputation that the public service has had to contend with for a long time. We've also seen that kind of lazy worker rhetoric in the US, when we had that episode of Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency email all government workers with an ultimatum to respond with 5 bullet points of things they had achieved in the previous week or face termination.
What do you reckon, Pete? Is work from home here to stay? What does the stats tell us? Can we get out the crystal ball?
I think work from home is here to stay in Australia in some form or another, probably in that hybrid model that has mostly been adopted now. That Sec Newgate Mood of the Nation survey found that while most people are happy with their current arrangements, 32% want to work more from days from home. And unsurprisingly, that's higher among women at 40%, and also among younger workers aged 18 to 35, also at 40%. So I think while older, predominantly male, wealthy executives would like to see more people at their desks every day, the reality is if companies want to retain and hire talent, particularly women and young workers, they're going to have to continue to offer work from home as a flexible working arrangement.
Anthony Albanese, Peter Dutton, hope you're listening. Peter Vercoe, thank you. And thank you for listening to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. I'm Rebecca Jones. This episode was recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri and Gadigal people of the Kulin and Eora Nation. It was produced by Paul Allen and edited by Chris Burke and Ainsley Chandler. Don't forget to follow and review the show wherever you get your podcasts and sign up for Bloomberg's free daily newsletter, Australia Briefing. Go to bloomberg.com to subscribe.